Shehan, with a huge week, we saw some bangers, in college football. We've talked Big 12. We'll do that with you as well. And a few games this weekend. What was your biggest take coming out or two from the weekend that was?
Well, first, I do have to say, I switched days and Ari's still bumping up into my window. I don't know about all this.
Diva stuff. That's what he said.
Diva stuff, absolutely. Yeah. But, this was such a great weekend of games, obviously, this past week. And, you have these heavyweight battles like Oregon going to Penn State. I think that to me was one of the most impressive performances that we've had of the college football season to this point. I mean, Oregon to me has kind of been that complete team that everybody's asking for. They've been electric on offense, fantastic on defense, run the ball well, pass the ball well. Like, there's not a whole lot more that you can ask of them at this point. But, to go back to some of what Ari said during his last segment, like, I think that Alabama poked some holes in Georgia and just exposed how kind of shallow the top of that SEC is. I think that right now, the best football in the country is being played in the Big Ten. And when you look at stuff like SP+, when you look at stuff like some of these national title metrics, like, it's actually the SEC right now that's falling behind everybody else, which is a shock to me even just 2 or 3 years ago.
Shehan, last week was chock full of big games. This one is more maybe upset specials around. But which game do you think changed the team's path the most out of the big ones last week?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, certainly for Penn State, I mean, they have no margin for error now. They have 2 games left against ranked opponents. And this is kind of what happens when you play bad non-conference schedule, is you just lose all margin for error. They're going to have to beat either number 1 Ohio State on the road or Indiana at home. And by the way, even if they beat Indiana, I don't know for sure that that's going to be enough to get them into the playoffs. So I think that they're going to have to really pull out something pretty special down the stretch. So I think that was a big loss for that team. I think that that also you look around, and again, this Georgia team, like it just does not look like the same level of team that we've seen the past little while. Another team that I'll mention as well in a look ahead spot was Florida State. Florida State, of course, plays Miami this week. That's a huge opportunity for that program. But they overlooked, one of their ACC compadres and ultimately end up losing a game to Syracuse that's going to cost them in a really big way. So I think that you start looking forward. And I mean, again, like similar to what I kind of mentioned with the SEC, like I think that outside of Miami, there's a lot of teams in the ACC that are really going to have to get things back on track to have a chance to compete for the playoff and for an ACC title.
Where does Ole Miss sit in your pecking order currently in the ACC?
Yeah, I think that right now, I think that there's a really good case that Ole Miss is number 1 in the SEC. And part of that is because of some of the issues that we've seen from LSU, who I picked preseason with a national championship, from Alabama, from Georgia. Texas has looked pretty miserable, to be frank. And Ole Miss, I think the thing that is exciting about this team in 2025 is that they've been incredibly dynamic. Trinidad Chambliss has come in at quarterback, a Division II transfer from Ferris State, just been a total revelation at that position. He's just one of those guys who comes out and is a playmaker, right? Who just makes stuff happen. And even though they had literally a first-round quarterback last year in Jackson Dart, he wasn't that kind of playmaker necessarily. He was more of a processor and I don't want to go as far as saying game manager, but like Trinidad Chambliss is the type of player who goes out and wins games for people. You saw that, of course, in the LSU game. So I think that right now they're my number 1 team in the SEC. But again, it is wide open right now. I think that, look, let's see what happens this week. Let's see if Vanderbilt can beat Alabama again. Because I think that if they do, they're seriously in this conversation. I think Oklahoma, depending on how quick John Mateer can get back, can be in this conversation. Tennessee, I think, has probably been the most impressive team outside of Ole Miss to this point. It is truly wide open in that conference. And
you didn't even mention Texas, I don't think, started.
And I will not.
Yeah, fair enough. But just the fact that they started off, they're at the top of the conversation, and now you're listing off 6-7 teams, and we're not even talking about them. I think just speaks to the kind of the depth and technically they could still be right back in the race at some point if things get better at the quarterback spot, I guess.
No, 100%. And the other thing that you mentioned with them as well is that they are going to be the biggest beneficiaries of the John Mateer injury at Oklahoma, because, look, we'll see obviously what Michael Hawkins can do out there. I've seen 2 Oklahoma teams with backup quarterbacks in the past 3 Red Rivers, and it was not very good to look at, let's say. But if you win that game, a game that maybe you wouldn't have won if John Mateer is healthy, then all of a sudden you head into a pretty manageable overall slate. And so, look, the other piece of this as well is that I think Texas, outside of Ohio State, probably has the best defense in the country. So, it's going to look a lot more like maybe an Iowa sort of run to an SEC title game than maybe the high-powered Arch Manning of it all that we expected. But you also can't fully count out Texas because of their path and because of their talents.
Yeah, it's kind of a TBA with them, or TBD, to be determined. So they are still really good. We just don't know. And maybe Florida allows them to get going. Who knows? What were your thoughts? Sam Pittman's out. Rhett Lashley, of course, an Arkansas alum player. You have the other guys that are that next tier with GJ and Jeff Traylor, among some others. What do you think is going to happen at Arkansas?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that they're going to take a big swing, certainly, at Rhett Lashley at first. But the reality is, I don't know if Arkansas right now is a better job than SMU. And there's a couple of reasons for that, right? One, of course, they have a lot of money, and Arkansas has money. But one argument I think that I've gotten into with some Arkansas folks is that, they're like, well, look, we have billionaires too, right? We got the Tysons, we got Jerry Jones, we got, the Waltons. But the reality is, if you need to get your boosters on board before you have access to money, you don't in practice have access to money. The thing about SMU is that access is permanent, right? To make a comparison to Ole Miss, who we just talked about, right? Ole Miss is not the richest program in the SEC, but what they do have is a very sustainable model of money, where they're able to go out and know every year, we're working with this amount of money, we're doing this amount of stuff. That has not been the case at Arkansas, and Arkansas has some conflicts when it comes to basketball rev share, for example, for baseball rev share. These are 2 sports that they expect to win national championships in, and even their athletic director acknowledged in football with the way that we fund. We don't expect to win a national championship. The other things too, right, is that, yes, there's going to be all this talk about Rhett Lashley being a former Arkansas player and being from Northwest Arkansas. Well, one, as somebody who lives in Dallas and has family in Northwest Arkansas, I can tell you, pretty easy drive. You're not living on Mars away from Northwest Arkansas. You can get home pretty easily from here as well. But the other piece of it too is that I spoke to Scott Frost before the season, just a little bit about when he was at Nebraska, and one of the things that he said was, look, here's the reality, right? It's cool to be the hometown guy when it's all going good, but when it goes bad, you can basically never go home. Right. And that's kind of the situation that you risk, going to an Arkansas situation that frankly is just not set up for success in any way. So I think that Rhett's going to be a long time conversation for Arkansas, but, I expect them to go down their list. I expect, whether you want to look at a Jeff Traylor, who obviously we have a lot of respect for, was an assistant there under Chad Morris, whether it is somebody like Eric Morris, who's basically, you could argue the preeminent quarterback developer in the country right now. There's going to be a lot of options. There's a lot of different directions they can go. They can go Texas, they can go scheme, they can go SEC, they can go recruiting. But I think it's going to be really interesting where their athletic director ultimately decides he wants to go.
Yeah, we talked about it yesterday, Shehan. If Rhett Lashley was at any other school the same size as SMU in the country, this would maybe not even be a conversation, right? It would just be like, oh, well, they're just going to get Rhett Lashley. He's super successful at Boston College or Washington State or whatever, and get him. But that's not the case.
No, it's a unique place. And by the way, something that I want people to keep in mind with some of this stuff as well is SMU had a coach leave for a Big 12 job a few years ago in Sonny Dykes. And that's kind of their villain origin story in some ways. I don't know if any of this stuff happens if Sonny Dykes doesn't leave SMU and make them feel inferior. So if there's one thing that Arkansas isn't going to do, it's going to be big timing SMU's boosters. SMU is going to be able to make it worth Rhett Lashley's time to stay there, both from a funding perspective, certainly a salary perspective, from a revenues perspective, from a player acquisition perspective. If he decides to leave, that is well within his rights. He can decide to do so. It's not going to be because SMU can't step to the table.
Shehan, your thoughts about it's early, it's just October 1st, but if in fact you had to vote for the Heisman today with so many of the bigger names that have kind of been disappointing, who would be in your conversation?
Well, I think that if it was a ballot cast today, I would go with John Mateer at Oklahoma. I think he's been transformational for that program. To me, honestly, you could maybe argue the only difference between Oklahoma last year and Oklahoma this year being a top 5 team is straight up that John Mateer is in the program. He's been responsible for 82% of Oklahoma's yards. He's number 2 in total offense, despite playing for an offense, by the way, that ranks number 50 in total offense. Oklahoma only averages 70 yards rushing per game from their running back. So he has been everything for this team to this point. Now, of course, like I mentioned, he's going to miss most likely the Texas game with a hand injury after undergoing surgery. They're trying to rush him back. I don't know if that's going to be a good idea. I don't know if it's going to be successful. But even if he does miss that game, they play 5 top 20 teams in their last 5 games. So he has an opportunity still to play his way in. I think that Trinidad Chambliss, who we talked about from Ole Miss, has been an incredible story. And this is ultimately a story award in many ways. A guy coming from Division II, an afterthought, brought in to be the backup, coming in and adding a level of dynamic play that they haven't had at the quarterback position in a little while. So I think that he's going to have a really good chance. But this is about as open a year as I can remember for the Heisman Trophy. There really has not been anybody who's come out and taken it to this point. And so I think that the way that this season goes along is going to play a huge part in ultimately who ends up winning this award.
Are you covering the game this weekend?
No, I'm just going to be from home this weekend, but next weekend I'll be doing the doubleheader, North Texas versus South Florida on Friday, and then Red River as well.
Texas,
so
OU.
Resting up this week and going to be out on the road the next week.
Have a great week, rest of the week. Shehan, thank you as always for your time.